Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is a very dusty Radeon HD 7770 graphics card. It's not the last 1GB GPU to ever be released. That one probably goes to the R7 260X, something like that, or maybe one of AMD's OEM graphics cards that released in mid-2014. The HD 7770 was certainly a very popular mid-range choice though back in 2012, and I saw loads of people recommending it when it came to putting together budget gaming systems. These days I wanted to see whether or not it's still enough to play games in 2020, and is 1GB of VRAM going to allow you to play some modern titles with ease, or will it be a total disaster? So a lot of these older cards that feature 1GB of VRAM won't just suffer because of this memory limitation, but they'll also lack the graphical power in order to perform well in modern titles, and that in itself is going to be a problem. For example, if you choose one of the better 1GB cards out there, say the 7850 for example, it may still struggle simply because it lacks the power to achieve 30 FPS or 60 FPS in some of these newer games. Even if it had 2 or 4 gigs of VRAM, it would probably still struggle, if you get what I mean. So let's start on a positive note and talk about some slightly older titles that the 7770 should handle with ease. It's paired with 16GB of 3200MHz DDR4, so performance may differ with alternative hardware. While the Ryzen 3 3100 that's also in the system is a fairly modest modern processor, it will allow the ASUS HD 7770 to reach its maximum potential. To be honest, you'd probably see a similar result in games even if you had a Ryzen 5 3600 for example, because of the GPU bottleneck. In GTA 5, even the normal settings will mean that we exceed the VRAM limit as seen here. Normal is of course this game's name for the low settings, but even so it still looks pretty good. The visuals are certainly helped out by the 1080p resolution I chose to use here, because while these settings do, as I said, exceed the VRAM limit, we were still able to achieve at least 60 FPS on average with this graphics card. A lower resolution isn't really necessary here at all. Another popular title, CSGO, also runs very nicely, though that's probably more likely due to the processor, as this is a CPU intensive game. As usual, this is bot match footage, though the figures on screen were taken from online play, and 100 FPS plus isn't an unrealistic expectation at all. The very low settings we're using aren't maxing out the VRAM either, so this graphics card is fine for Counter-Strike. The visually upgraded 2016 version of Skyrim, Skyrim Special Edition, also runs on this card, though not as well as I first anticipated. We were hovering around 40 frames per second here with some dips to the high 20s. The original version of the game would probably be a better choice, to be honest, if you want to explore this open world on a 1GB GPU like this one. A drop in resolution would also be a good idea if you wanted to stick with the enhanced release though. So after initially testing these older games, I didn't really know what to expect as we moved into modern title territory. Would it be a complete disaster, or will the 7770 provide us with some surprising results? Well, let's get the failures out the way first, shall we? Red Dead Redemption 2 will start but crash with a random error. You'll get a warning upon starting the game regarding the video memory, which is fair enough, and I think from that point on the game is just trying to configure itself in the background for this card. It's almost as if it can't find low enough settings to use, so it just thinks okay and closes. We have played it using integrated Vega graphics before though, so I'm quite surprised that this happened and we couldn't proceed. Not to mention the card still supports the latest AMD drivers at the time of this video too. Next up here is Rage 2 at 1080p. Our 7770 managed a solid 1 frame per second. It's not really that good, well, obviously, but there's not really much else I can say. Switching to the lowest resolution, which was either 800 by 600 or 640 by 480, I can't quite remember, and we see an increase to 8 FPS. It sounds bad, I know, but technically this is a 700% performance increase. Always look on the positive side of things. As I move on to PUBG, I was expecting a pretty bad result here as well, but despite the VRAM limitation, we still saw at least 30 FPS on average with the very low settings. We could have probably used low instead. As I mentioned at the start, the GPU usage is still at 99 to 100% a lot of the time, so even if the card had more VRAM, I don't think we'd see much of an improvement in terms of the frame rate. I'll have to run a test one day between a 1 and 2 gig card of some sort, maybe something a little more powerful. I am quite impressed with this PUBG result though. It's not exactly a new game, but it does still receive updates and it's still hugely popular, hence why I think it's still worthy of a test. The same can be said for Fortnite. This game actually ran very close to 60 FPS at low with 100% resolution scaling at 1080p, so we weren't making any resolution sacrifices here. Another surprising result, to be honest. I was also perplexed at how I saw less stutter here in terms of the 1% figure and 0.1% figure than I have done with some other far more powerful GPUs. It's not often that both the 1% and 0.1% figure is so close to 30. Usually there is far more stutter with Fortnite, ever since the latest update. Next up then, it's COD Warzone. After spending the day downloading the 40GB update, I was eager to jump back in, and what a better place to start than with the 7770 to see how things ran. As you can see, despite the aeroplane on screen, we weren't off to a flying start by any means. With our boots eventually on the ground, the performance evened out a little bit, but the frame rate was too low to consider this a playable experience. The VRAM limit in the graphical options menu was still exceeded by about 200 megabytes, even with these very low settings, and in-game, it seems as though Warzone was utilising less than 900 megabytes. Still, that is cutting it very fine, and so much as increasing the resolution up to 720p would make things a lot worse. As you can see once again, the card was maxing out usage-wise. This will likely occur with every 1GB card out there, as cards with a single gig of VRAM won't be powerful enough for some of these newer games anyway. Finally then, it's Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I started off with 1080p but quickly found that the card struggled, not just during the benchmark run but during the first couple of levels too. I can only imagine that 20 or so frames per second would pretty much be the continuous average throughout. 720p at low then was definitely much better. Despite lacking video memory, we still saw a plus 30 FPS average. Cards like the 7770 here should still be good for some 720p gaming, as well as full HD gaming in titles like Fortnite, CSGO and GTA 5. That's not really that bad considering those three are probably still some of the most popular titles out at the moment. So, you want a new graphics card, it's 2020 and you're looking to play some modern title. Should you go with a 1GB graphics card? Absolutely not. Whilst you may be able to play some games as you've seen, like Fortnite, PUBG, GTA 5, there are too many games whereby 1GB of VRAM will cause you problems. Even the most powerful 1GB card out there, whatever that might be, I'm not entirely sure, possibly the 7850 or the R7 260X. There's probably a big one that I'm forgetting. Whatever card it might be, it will certainly struggle in modern games. In fact, I'd recommend a 2GB graphics card at least. Try and opt for a 4GB GPU if you can. There are some decent deals to be had out there, but 2GB cards are still a lot better than 1GB cards these days. I also messed around a little bit with overclocking just to see what difference this made. Tried a few different settings, and I was able to improve the Shadow of the Tomb Raider frame rate by about 3 or 4 FPS. Nothing significant. The same goes for PUBG. I squeezed a couple more frames out of it, but again, it was really nothing too significant. And of course, we can't do anything about that VRAM limitation, so overclocking is kind of pointless in the grand scheme of things. Plus, the GPU is still going to be maxing out too in a lot or most scenarios. There are also a few older 3GB cards around, you know, like the 7970 if you want a 7000 series AMD card. That is still an acceptable performing card in 2020 if you don't mind turning some settings down a little bit. 3 or 4GB cards would be ideal as the absolute minimum in my opinion, but as I said before, 2 gigs is still probably fine in some of those less demanding games. Fortnite is certainly going to benefit from at least another gigabyte of RAM as opposed to this one. Whilst the average frame rate really wasn't too bad, there's no point going out and looking for a 1 gig card anymore. Unless all you want to play is literally CSGO, you need something that acts as a display adapter for a powerful processor or something like that. But even then, it never makes sense buying a GPU specifically for one title, as we've discussed many times when we put together those minimum and recommended system builds. As for this video though, well, I hope you've enjoyed a look back not only at what a 1 gigabyte GPU can do in 2020, but also at what the 7770 can do in 2020. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it down below, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.